It's not very good to get to your late 50s and realise that most of the things you've been told in your life are probably not true. And you go through a sort of grieving process, but then you have to live in the world how it is, not how you'd like it to be. I was watching senior scientists who were standing on the truth, raising concerns about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, and they were being reputationally destroyed. And going against the narrative. Well, anytime anyone tells you the science is settled, that should set a massive red flag going. Fortunately, many years ago, many decades ago, I studied biological sciences at Nottingham University, and I specialised in biochemistry with genetics, behaviour and virology. And I could read those scientific papers, and I could speak to the scientists and understand the language they were talking. The science is never settled. Science advances by theory, counter-theory, argument, evidence, not on dogma. And that's where we got to, whether it was on net zero or whether it was about the safety and efficacy of these experimental mRNA vaccines. The excess deaths we've seen are mostly strokes and heart problems initially. And that's not surprising. We were told that these experimental so-called vaccines stay in the arm for a couple of days and create an immune response. So you've got a lipid nanoparticle coating around some genetic material, messenger RNA, floating around your bloodstream. The first cells they're going to come into contact with are your endothelial cells, the cells that line your blood system. And they're going to enter. The reason they're in a lipid nanoparticle coating is because our cell walls are fat, and fat likes fat, so that allows them to pass through into our cells. They go to the nucleus and they start making spike protein. A normal vaccine, the old-fashioned vaccines, you have an inert piece of bacteria or virus which will give you an immune response without giving you the disease. I was very concerned when the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency in November 2022 decided they wanted to extend the vaccines to babies down to 6 months, from 5 to 6 months. I'd already found out after the Hancock hanky-panky business, where he left, and we had Sajid Javid in as the health secretary, I was told that there were about 6 doctors who at the time were Conservative MPs. Every one of them had been to Sajid Javid and urged him not to authorise those vaccines for anyone under the age of 18. He listened to them, and then he authorised the vaccines. So I thought he was going to authorise them for the babies. I knew there was going to be a pushback on me, and of course, I knew, but I felt I had to stand up and try and win something for whatever I was going to have to do. And I wanted allies. I went to people I trusted, people I'd campaigned with before, mostly Brexiteers. I went to David Davis. This is in November 2022, and he confided in me that he thought I was right about the vaccines. He said that he'd had 2 Pfizers, gone to the gym. He's 10 years older than me. He likes to keep fit. He'd gone to the gym and had 2 micro heart attacks. And he'd had to go to hospital, had an ECG, and the doctor told him that if he wasn't as fit as he was, he'd probably be dead. But he wouldn't speak out. I went to John Redwood and I said, look, John, there's something not right about these vaccines. We've got to stop them jabbing the little children. And he said, I think you're right, Andrew. He said, I've had 2 Pfizers and there's something not right about all this. I'm not having any more. But he said, as far as campaigning on it goes, on this one, Andrew, you're on your own. And Andrea Jenkins, she came to me a year ago and in Parliament. And it's only 1-to-1. She can deny it if she wants to, but I swear on my life it happened. She came to me and said, Andrew, I want you to tell you that something. My sister's just had the Moderna booster and now she's paralysed from the neck down. I said, I'm really sorry about that, Andrea. I'm really sorry. But now you know, you're going to have to speak out because you know. She said, well, she's a nurse and she doesn't want any bad publicity with the NHS. You know what they're like. And the doctor says she's probably going to be able to walk again one day. And I said, well, it doesn't matter. You don't have to tell them where you found out from. You know, you've got a duty, you've got to speak out. And she just turned around and said, I'm not speaking out, and left me. And the day I spoke out, on the 13th of December 2022, my life changed. I was completely cancelled by the mainstream media from that moment forward. And I can remember the BBC's last interview with me, and they asked me why I was willing to destroy my parliamentary career on the hill of vaccine harms. And I said that because that's the hill you're killing my people on. What I will tell you is, despite them cancelling me and saying everything I said was rubbish, the UK is one of only 2 countries in Europe didn't authorise those vaccines for small children. I was suspended on the 11th of January from the Conservative Party for speaking out on the vaccines and for retweeting a paper from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which was written by a Jewish gentleman, and accused of anti-Semitism for saying that the COVID-19 vaccine rollout was the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. In January, I again wanted allies, and I went to see Jacob Rees-Mogg, a man who I had respect for. He was a good Brexiteer. I'd spoken at events for him in his own constituency in Somerset. I'd stayed at his house on a Saturday night. I'd met his 6 children and his lovely wife, Helena, and he was a devout Catholic, to the point where on the Sunday morning before I left, I saw the local priest arrive at his house to carry out a little service in his own chapel in his house. So I thought, this is a man I can rely on. I met with him in his office. I gave him an hour and a half of my concerns about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, and also MG 163, the NICE guideline 163, midazolam and morphine, and the euthanisation of those vulnerable elderly in our hospitals in spring 2020, where they moved elderly out of the hospitals to make way for the expected first wave of COVID patients, which never appeared. I'd also put a written question to the government asking them what I thought was quite a reasonable question: how many vulnerable elderly were moved into care homes and nursing homes in March, April 2020 to make way for the first wave of COVID patients, and how many were dead within 7, 14, 28, 56, 72 days of that move on their death certificate, A, COVID-19, B, other causes. And the government answer came back, we don't hold any of that information. So the government were telling me they didn't have a clue how many elderly they'd moved out of hospital or what had happened to them. Well, I'm afraid I know what happened to them. Most of those people were sadly put on midazolam and morphine, a respiratory suppressant, which is the last thing you do for someone who was tested positive for, you suspected may have a respiratory virus which was causing them difficulty breathing. Why would you add to that? But of course, the ones who didn't really have COVID, they all died of respiratory failure, and COVID-19 was put down on all of their death certificates. And at the end of that hour and a half, Jacob Rees-Mogg said to me, Andrew, I said, what do you think, Jacob? Are you going to help me? And he said, Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world with all the personal risk for you which that will entail. And what I'll tell you is I walked out of that meeting at that point, and I've never spoken to Jacob Rees-Mogg after that meeting, having known him for 13 years. I spoke out in March 2023, only quoting the government's own figures that have been available to the government since the 26th of October 2022, before they tried to petition to vaccinate the small children. It was about the safety and efficacy of the booster campaign that we'd been having. A booster. It was the government's own figures, and it was called the NNV numbers. NNV standing for number needed to vaccinate. The number needed to vaccinate to keep one person out of hospital presenting with COVID-19 symptoms, and another number for keeping one person out of intensive care with COVID-19. And the government figures had the population divided into 10-year groupings, so 30 to 39-year-olds, 40 to 49-year-olds, and it also subdivided them into what they regarded as healthy and at risk, so people with comorbidities. And the government's own figures showed that, I think it was the healthy 40 to 49-year-olds, which a group I wish I were in, they needed to boost 994,000 of them just to keep one person out of hospital. And with a severe adverse event rate of 1 in 800, you're going to put 1,150 people at risk of death, life-changing injury, hospitalisation, to keep one person out of hospital with COVID-19, a bit of a cough. I explained all this to the government in my debate. Even the most at-risk group, the over 75s with comorbidities, the number you needed to boost for the autumn booster in 2022 was 800, which meant that even the most vulnerable group in society, all you were doing was swapping one risk of being in-hospitalised with COVID-19 is exactly the same risk as being hospitalised or killed by the vaccine. So there was no benefit to anyone, and it was costing millions and millions and millions, billions of pounds to administer these vaccines. Again, the government said in March 23 that I was talking nonsense. But if you look back on the records, 3 weeks later, they upped the minimum age for the spring booster to 75. I also had been putting in from January 23, and I can only put in once a week, for a debate on excess deaths, because I was seeing the ONS figures coming in week after week. After a pandemic, where you would expect to have excess deaths if you really had a pandemic, where sadly the vulnerable and the elderly had passed before their time, after the pandemic's over, you expect a period of less than excess deaths, because someone who sadly died during the pandemic, who might have lived 6 months or 12 months longer, as the saying goes, yeah, you can only die once, can't you? You can only die once, so they couldn't die again when they might have died. So you should have had a period of less than excess deaths. What was clear is we've never had a period of less than expected deaths. We've always had excess deaths since the pandemic was over, and that's not right. That's not right at all. And I'd put in for the debate on the excess deaths every week. I could only put in on sitting weeks, and I had to put in 26 times. And I couldn't put in during the summer recess, so it was 9 months of applying every week I could for a debate. And I actually only got, which I think was the first ever debate in any parliament in the world on excess deaths. I think it was the 26th or something of October 2023. And the only way I got that debate is that in the summer of 2023, I made a short documentary about thalidomide, the untold story, which you can have a look at on YouTube. And what the conclusions of that was that thalidomide was withdrawn in the UK in 1961. It was 1972 before the word thalidomide was ever mentioned in the chamber of the House of Commons. And judges in Strasbourg had ruled that speakers of the House of Commons had deliberately suppressed debate for 11 years on thalidomide and questions around it. And I sent that video to Lindsay Hoyle, the current Speaker of the House of Commons, and I told his staff, I said, show this to the Speaker and tell him I don't want history repeating itself. Within 2 weeks, I got a debate on excess deaths. That's the only reason I got it. I actually brought over a load of experts from America. I had Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. David E. Martin. I got Steve Kirsch, the analyst. I had Robert Malone, who developed the mRNA technology. He's actually double vaccinated with Pfizer. He's vaccine harmed himself. And he told me that he took the vaccine in good faith. And then after he'd had two, he rang his old work buddies up and said, how did you sort out all the problems with the technology? And they said, what problems? And then he realised they never had. He's severely vaccine harmed himself. And I had also the absolutely fantastic Professor Angus Dalgleish, who's the top oncologist, most cited oncologist in the UK. Absolutely fantastic. And we addressed Parliament in a committee room, and I managed to get 22 MPs there, and they supported me then afterwards for further debates, proper debates on excess deaths. I had a Westminster Hall debate in January 24, which was 90 minutes, and eventually in April this year we had a 3-hour debate, which is actually 2 hours 30. But even at that, it was my debate 10 minutes before I'm due to open up, and I had a 30-minute opening speech. I was told by the Speaker's office I could only speak for 15 minutes. 10 minutes to go. I managed to negotiate him to 20 minutes. And that's the games that they were playing. The very few MPs wanted to listen. They really didn't want to know. They all know, really. There was so much political capital from all the parties put into the pandemic response. They knew there was a general election coming, and no one wanted to break ranks and admit to the public that it was a complete disaster. We've now got what we've got. We've got a majority Labour government, the biggest majority Labour government following the general election. I will tell you why we had the general election. There's several reasons. First of all, the inflation figures were better than expected, but the government know, and everyone in Parliament should know, that food prices are going to go up through the roof later this year. That's going to be inflationary, so it's probably as good as it was going to get. On the second point was the Rwanda, so-called Rwanda, dealing with the migrants, the illegal migrants. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that legislation was never going to work. I told Rishi Sunak, as had many MPs who've been in the House of Commons for more than 5 minutes, that legislation was never robust enough. It was only window dressing to persuade the public that something was being done. All it was is a charter for lawyers to make lots of money. You and I have got more chance of going to Rwanda than any illegal immigrants, I can promise you. And obviously, by November, it would be fairly obvious that to the public that exactly what was happening with that deal. Also, the COVID-19 safe and effective narrative was collapsing. Information was coming out all the time. And basically, it's like a game of chess. I was getting the government where I wanted them, so what they have to do is kick the board over and put the pieces back to the beginning, which is what calling a general election does. And also, very importantly, my informants from the Ministry of Defence had told me that Rishi had told the generals, the admirals and the air vice marshals that he doesn't want to be a wartime prime minister. The fact is we are already at war technically with Russia. There are British personnel administering the firing of British missiles, the Storm Shadow missiles, out of Ukraine into Russia. If that doesn't sound like we're at war with Russia at the moment. And all the other NATO nations are doing exactly the same. We're being sleepwalking, led, shepherded into a third world war, which with devastating consequences. They've never levelled with the public, and Rishi didn't fancy that. He knew which way it was going, so he bailed out with an early general election when the Conservatives were 20 points behind the Labour Party. What have we got to look forward to now? Well, it's great to be amongst so many awake people, but there's a lot of trouble coming. We've got, the last week before Rishi called the general election, we had an urgent question on the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations. For the first time I can ever remember, in over 14 years in Parliament, not one Labour MP turned up on the back benches for that urgent question. The Labour Party are going to support, they call it cooperation, it's capitulation to the WHO. The reason they didn't want anybody there is they didn't want any questions on the record. They're going to approve the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty and the amendments. That's going to give sweeping powers to the unelected Dr. Tedros, unelected, unaccountable, non-tax-paying, diplomatically immune from prosecution. There's not a court in the land where you, I, or anybody else on the planet can hold that man to account for what he will inflict on us when he has these sweeping dictatorial autocratic powers. What could possibly go wrong if we give those people the powers? You know? And also he'll be calling, I believe he'll be calling a bird flu pandemic probably this winter, in line with Mr. Gates' direction that the next pandemic will be by 2025. And the bad news is that the initial trials I've seen, they've approved it, it's in manufacture now, the bird flu vaccine, evidence I've seen shows that's 4 times more deadly than the COVID-19 vaccines were just from their own trials. And I fear that they'll be mandated on us later this year. We've got a potential war with Russia which could go hot at any moment. The government threatens us with conscription and national service for our young people. At the same time, as it just shut the last steelworks in the UK that can make weapons-grade steel, none of this adds up. At the same time as we're stopping our farmers from producing food, not that food's ever been used as a weapon, if you thought we might be at war with somebody, not that they've ever tried to starve us out before. We only produce half the food that we consume now in the UK, so it leaves us hugely vulnerable. So none of this adds up at all, and these are all problems that we've got to face. So I think there's going to be lots of opportunity to wake people up, and I think it's going to come to a head in the next 6 months. I want to be optimistic, so this is something I recorded last October, and I pretty much stand by every word. It's a short video.
Hello my friends, and thank you for joining me here at Bridgen on the Hill Church. As you know, this place is very special to me, and it's not unlike thousands of other beauty spots which dot across the landscape of our nation, which means so much to local people, grounding them in a deep sense of place that is both unique and universal. This church is most famous really for 2 things: the view you can see as far as Nottingham on a clear day, and the rare Saxon carvings. A monastery was built here when the Kingdom of Mercia was at the height of its powers, with some very beautiful carvings which we've retained today. In the 10th century, the Kingdom of Mercia and the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms united to form a new nation, England, or Angelander, the land of the Angles, a nation that has stood proudly for centuries, weathering changes, celebrating victories, always moving together, moving forward. But now our nation stands on a precipice unfortunately of our own making. We have allowed globalists with no care for our nation, or for the nations of our brothers and sisters around the world, to buy their way into the command structures of our countries, and they seek now to transform the vibrant colours of our nations into one bland and uniform shade of grey. They poison our blood with untested medical products. They poison our bodies with food drenched in pesticides. They poison the minds of our children by spreading the nonsense that men can be women and women can be men. They poison our very freedom by trying to take away the energy that we heat our houses with, we light our way with, that's driven our progress throughout the centuries, and package it up and redistribute it to us as they see fit. And the politicians you elect to represent our nations assist them in their mission, which is nothing less than the murder of those nations. But things are changing fast. The control mechanisms of these globalists are actually a house of cards glued flimsily together by the compliance of the masses in ignorance of their true power. The overreach of COVID has slapped many of us, myself included, wide awake. Movements around the world are saying no and reaching back to their own nations, and realise if they rest on their own sovereignty, the house of cards can easily be pulled apart. As more people wake up, the more these billionaires and their pet bureaucrats realise that their power and their control is actually slipping away. Since that control is actually based in fear, it's their natural instinct to dial it up on us, to redouble their efforts. So you must learn, we must learn, to live our lives without fear. We need to laugh, to live and to love in the face of adversity. There is nothing to fear from a virus that kills at approximately the same rate as annual influenza. There's nothing to fear about climate change, because the climate has always changed. And as they shepherd us towards a third world war, how will fear help us if that nightmare comes to pass? The only thing you should be afraid of is a future planned by globalists, whose project requires your compliance and has no room for your links to special places like this. These people will not relinquish their power easily or lightly. We're going to be in for a bumpy ride. But when it's over, and it will be over, we will be able to build a new nation, something better than we had before. The Saxon kings and queens and countless English men and women fought and died so you and I could live in a nation that was prosperous, safe and free. The globalists have a different plan for our future, but all we have to say is we will not comply. All we have to say is no. And their plans are dead and buried. Thank you very much for listening to me.
No's a very small word, but it's got a huge resonance if millions of us say it, and it will be heard in the halls of the so-called self-proclaimed elite. Thank you very much for listening to me.